Welcome back to this week's Parent Parsha series, Parshat Vayishlach. The parenting tip on the go for the week is the art of being present, following the story up. One thing that I was talking about with a friend of mine, and I think is something that at least I'm struggling with and trying to be more aware of in my own home, is the idea that we have technology around us all the time, right? We're very constantly aware and present and having a discussion around our children's technology usage and how they engage with it, and are they over engaged with it and under engaged in it. But one of the things that's, I think, challenging for adults currently, and especially in the pandemic, where we're working from home more often than not all of us, but some of us, um, is that we're expected to be available a lot and with frequency. Whereas before, maybe we would be more mindful to leave our phone somewhere or just disconnect. Kind of, we left the office, we checked out. I think today there's a little bit more of like a tendency towards frequency and feeling an urgency to constantly be on. And I think it's a challenge. And I was thinking about it more from the perspective that sometimes I hear in the back of my head a kid is telling me a story and I'm hearing it, but I'm not really hearing it. And what made me think about it is the fact that something that at least I'm working on, and I think is something that maybe other people might find interesting to maybe be struggling with, is the idea that being present and really listening when our kids are talking is really hard and something we have to be working on. And I think one of the reasons why it's so critical is because sometimes kids are telling us the story, but they're not actually telling us what happened to them. Sometimes I hear a story and I hear that my kid told me a story and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Or, um, you know, tell me more about it. But I'm not necessarily as present as I could be to really be asking myself, well, what is my kid trying to tell me about what happened in this story? So it happened even just like last week. My kid was telling me a story, and one of my kids, my oldest Layla, was telling me a story about something that happened in class with some book assignment, and there was a division, and some kids were doing it by themselves and some kids were going to do it in pairs. And afterwards I kind of looked at her and I paused, and then I said to her, are you trying to tell me that you were disappointed about the fact that you weren't sure how to navigate this? And I thought to myself that there are often moments in time where I'm missing that opportunity because I'm listening, but I'm not being present and I'm not able to actually follow up on what they're trying to tell me. And I think sometimes that one of the things that's challenging for kids and probably for adults also is we know something happened. We know it didn't totally sit right with us, but we're not exactly sure what's bothering us about it. And we also might feel insecure about what's bothering us about it, right? Like maybe we should just let it go. Maybe it wasn't a big deal, but it's kind of still bothering me, but I don't know what's bothering me about it. And as parents, we want to be able to help our kids navigate some of these conflicting things that happen to them. Sometimes there are conflicts. Sometimes it's how they interacted with a teacher. Sometimes it's how they interacted with a friend. Sometimes it's not necessarily an interaction, it's just something that happened to them and how they felt about it. Um, Sometimes it's not a negative thing. Sometimes it could be a positive thing, right? Like something happened and they felt good about it, but they weren't sure if they made somebody else feel bad, or they weren't sure what it meant for them that they felt good about it. And so I think that the art of being present, um, so much of it has to do with the fact that our kids tell us so many things by virtue of telling us a story. And our obligation and our job as parents is to try to the best of our capabilities, because we always think about good enough parenting. We're not going to be able to do it all the time. We're not going to be able to be present all the time. And it's okay to tell our kids, I actually want to hear what you're saying, but I can't focus right now. So I need you to just wait and then tell me the story again. And sometimes my kids will be like, no, forget it. And I'm like, no, I really want to hear it. I just can't hear it this minute. And that's okay. We're like actually telling them and responding to them instead of just kind of saying to them, like we know, they know we're not listening and we know we're not listening when we're just doing that. And so I think that there's actually like a real thoughtfulness and art to the fact that we want to be present. We want to listen to the stories and then ask ourselves, what is my child trying to tell me when they're telling me this story? And one of the things sometimes I listen to a Parsha idea and it gets me into a thought about parenting. And sometimes it's the opposite, where I have a parenting idea, something that I'm hearing a lot from my clients, something that I'm thinking a lot about in my own home. Sometimes a combination of the two. But this came to me a little bit, partially from an experience that happened in my own home, but partially from an experience when I was thinking about something that I was reading about in relation to this week's Parsha. So this week's Parsha, I'm moving the screen around so you could see. It's a thought for your table. It says on the top, Instead, you have my face. But basically, in this week's Parsha, there are so many things that happen. But one thing that happens at the very beginning is that Yaakov is coming to meet Esav. It's this very fateful, tension-filled, dramatic meeting. They haven't seen each other. When they last parted ways, it was not on good terms. Esav wanted to kill Yaakov. Yaakov was fleeing for his life. And now Yaakov is returning to Eretz Yisrael with a family. He's not really sure what he's going to meet when he meets up with Esav. And the first pasuk, I mean, it's pasuk chet, but one of the first pasukim that we're introduched to is the fact that we get a double lashon, a double language about how Yaakov is feeling. He's fearful, vayira, but he's also anxious, vayatzer lo, vayelchatz atamei. He's very nervous. And so people pick up on, what is this double lashon? Like, what's happening here? What is Yaakov afraid of? And what is he anxious about? What is he in distress about? What is the pasuk trying to tell us by having this double lashon? And the Breshit Rabbah picks up on, as many of the Mefarshim do, but picks up on this, and the explanation that the Breshit Rabbah gives is explaining the fact that Yaakov was fearful of two things. Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzer lo, amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, lo haya yireh lo hayatzar, ela v'yireh shelo yahareg. So there's a double lashon. You could read it yourself, but basically, in summary, what's happening here is that Yaakov is afraid of two things. He's afraid that he is going to be killed, but he's also in distress about the fact that he might have to kill somebody else. And Reb Jonathan Sachs, in his book Covenant and Conversation for Breshit, points out that there's lots of interpretations trying to understand this. Like, what is he nervous about in terms of that he's going to kill somebody else? We know that if somebody is coming after your life, you're allowed to protect yourself. What's happening here? And so there are some opinions that say that he's nervous, that he is going to be in battle and he's going to kill somebody who had no reason to be involved in this and wasn't deserving of this. Yes, he's defending his life, but in battle, things happen all the time. They don't always go the way that we anticipate them. So many things are out of control. And what if I kill somebody that shouldn't have been killed? In this context of protecting my life. So that's one way of thinking about it. But the other way of thinking about it, I'm sure there are many ways, but one other way that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs picks up on that I really thought was so thoughtful and I think so relevant for the conversations in our homes today is that what is getting picked up on is the moral dilemma that Judaism does not run away from. And he gets to it from lots of different directions, but I think the story in the Talmud Yerushalmi in Trumot 47a really kind of brings the point home, which is there's a story of a fugitive who's running away. And he is running away from a Roman city, and he runs to the city of Lod, and he's in the city, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is the Rav in this city, and the Roman guards come and try to get this fugitive out, and he doesn't know what to do. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, should he give over this fugitive? What's it going to do to the people in the city? The peril. Ultimately, what he ends up doing is convincing the fugitive to turn himself over. And in theory, all's well that ends well. But the Gemara notes that Eliyahu Hanavi comes back to him and says to him, "V'zu mishnat hachasidim." Like, just because it was probably like the right thing to do, does that make it right? Is this the way of righteous people? And I think one of the conversations that he's starting to bring home is just because something is lahalacha correct, does that necessarily mean that it's the right thing to do? And what happens in situations where there is no right and there is no wrong? Or what happens in situations where there is a right and there is a wrong, but even the right thing doesn't necessarily sit well with us and doesn't necessarily fit right? He brings up the discussion. There's a famous quote from Golda Meir about this, about the fact that she'll never, among her greatest upsets is the fact that they made her children, meaning the Jewish people, into people who are killing other people. And so there's a discussion about this also, like in terms of like the 6-Day War, that even though it was such a great success, that the soldiers who were on the battle lines, they themselves don't necessarily experience a success because they saw the trauma and the horror and the death that was the consequence of the success. And I think trying to start to have a conversation with our children about the idea that sometimes situations can happen and they have multifaceted results. And even if it's right, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's moral. And even if it's the correct thing to do lahalacha. It doesn't always mean that it sits right with us, and that it's okay to have these debates within ourselves and trying to parse them out. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. And like, that's what Torah and Judaism is about, is the recognition that sometimes things that are right don't always feel perfectly good, and trying to parse that out. I think there's a good conversation to start happening in terms of what makes something a dilemma. What's the scenario in this week's Parsha where there is a dilemma? Are there other scenarios in Tanakh where we see dilemmas? What is the idea of leading a moral life? When you, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. Doesn't make it moral, doesn't make it ethical. And trying to kind of put all these pieces together that I think are really complex. And I think it's just a good starting point to have this conversation. This week's Parsha treats, we could do lots of different things. I'm lowering myself again. I will tell you that in my house, I started making cupcake toppers, like in the shape of sijurim, and some camouflage things, and presents, thinking about the different ways that Yaakov sends over to Esav, right, in terms of his preparing for war. He does tefillah, he prepares for Melchama by dividing up the camps, and he sends gifts to Esav. I have made these gifts before. These are not my pictures, but I have made them. You can buy just like easy taffies and then just kind of like wrap something on them. You don't have to make it hard. You could even just do it independently and not put them on a cupcake and kind of like totally skip that. If you're in the mood to start going crazy and mixing up different batters, that's a great idea for these gingerbread men. I love this idea of these boxes. I think it's so fun. I think you could do them in lots of ways. You could do them with Rice Krispie treats. You could do them with a brownie mix. You could also just do them with graham crackers and just kind of like assemble them and put them together that way. I think the idea is to have like a present gift, and you kind of like can put a surprise on the inside. The pots de creme is a source of much machloket. I love it. I think it's a very cute idea, but as Eitan, my husband, pointed out, he's like, it's not pshat, and nobody's going to figure it out. I want the pots de creme because there is a midrash that Yaakov returns to go get the pots that he left behind, the pachim katanim, and that's when he meets with the angel and does battle. You could do battle scenes. You could do like probably like 2 parts of a cake and have like different colors and different sides. I think there's like different things that you could do. Again, I always like to remember that sometimes as we go into some of these parshiot, where it's not necessarily as clear, like it's really okay, and it's okay for it to be fun, so, and to be creative and to push the kids to think about the parsha. And I think it's part of the fun. At least it's part of the fun in our house. Maybe we have different ideas of fun, but in our house, it's definitely part of the fun. The kids try to kind of think about it and like what I was getting at and what they were thinking, and what they would have done. So I encourage other people to think about things that will jive well with their home, and that are up their baking alley, and to share with us. So Shabbat Shalom. Look forward to hearing from all of you.